Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's BA Insights session. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome three guests and to talk about a really interesting topic, business analysis and the arts. And before we talk about what that topic is in detail, let's do some introductions. And if I can, let's start with Rachel first to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Rachel Drinkwater. I'm Senior Business Analyst, currently working for the University of Warwick. I'm also a comedian, so I perform with an improvised comedy troupe just back from Edinburgh Fringe in August. So first time up at the Fringe, absolutely amazing experience. And I'm also a general theatre practitioner, so doing acting of various types. Been doing that for, well, since I was tiny, but most recently in the last 15 years. So quite a bit of stage experience.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. And you seem like a perfect person to come on the session and talk about the arts. So great to get started. Scott, if I could ask you to introduce yourself as well, please.
Sure. My name is Scott Bennett. I've previously worked at IIBA as a manager of business analysis and have recently done a career change. I'm now a full-time professional YouTuber. So I teach here in my workshop about furniture repair, restoration, and woodworking skills. I spent 29 years in the business analysis industry, so really happy to be here to have this conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Scott. And Howard.
Hi, I'm Howard Podeswa. I'm CEO of Noble Inc. I've been started out, I guess, as a software developer and systems analyst and moved my way in the 90s towards business analysis and particularly specializing in agile analysis. I've written a number of books on business analysis and product ownership. The last one being the most recently, I guess, being the Agile Guide to Business Analysis and Planning. This particular book. And I would say almost since the beginning, I have had a dual track life. So I started off as in IT, but at some point, just a few years in, I got the art bug. I do come from a family of artists, so it was a little bit hard to avoid it. I stopped my IT work a little bit and went into art school. I went to an art college and got my degree. But actually, it's not right to say, I guess I stopped my IT work. I paid my way through art college by doing software work. So I'd be running from the art college, for example, down to the train station where I was working on a scheduling system. And it was a little bit of a crazy life, but I've been leading that crazy life ever since. So I have a professional art practice where I show through galleries and, the usual way. At the same time, I've been continuing on what I do in IT and found it a very interesting combination, which I guess we can talk a little bit later.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. And it's again, it's just another person that demonstrates that they're the right people to be on this call, as you all are, of course. All right, so let's get the ball rolling then. So in terms of what I'd like to ask, really, starting with Rachel first, is really what are your artistic interests or passions, and how have they influenced your BA approach?
Sure. So as I mentioned, spend a lot of time on stage and have done for quite a bit of my life. I guess so. I sort of started doing sort of acting training as an adult about 15 years ago. That led to doing quite a lot of stagecraft and stage practice and sort of doing sort of shows, mainly in conjunction with the Royal Spa Centre in Leamington Spa. They were sort of our home theatre. Since the pandemic, I've been getting into improvised comedy again, performing in Leamington Spa, so monthly gigs, sorry, at the Temperance Spa in Leamington. Going all about the plugs here, but yeah, spending a lot of time on stage. And I mean, the thing that's really changed since I started doing that was just heaps and heaps of confidence. Certainly with the improv, getting up in front of an audience and fielding questions, adapting workshops on the fly, things like that. Just having that confidence to stand up in front of an audience and do whatever's necessary. That's certainly come from the stage. But also a lot of that levity, bringing fun, bringing playfulness to workshops, to sessions with stakeholders and with customers. And I've started to introduce some games as well. So improv games for ideation. I'm currently working on something we called Emo Quads. So it's a little short form improv game where each area of the stage has an emotion. and you play out a scene, but every time you step into that quad, you have to sort of adopt to that emotion. So your character moves into that emotion. And I'm working on and sort of trialing a version of that. It's very similar to De Bono's Six Thinking Hats, where you've got that movement, you've got you're in role play as a customer and you're moving around those different potential emotions that a customer could have. And it's really useful for ideation, for thinking about things from different worldviews. So there's loads of stuff that can be brought in from theatre and from stage into the business space. I've also run a couple of workshops on public speaking, so bringing stagecraft into public speaking. And I'm going to do another little plug for my book that I've just released. So a Business Analysis Careers book through the British Computer Society, which is called The Next Step. And there's quite a lot in there about storytelling and interview techniques and using some of that stage confidence in interview and in presentation as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. And I mean, certainly as far as the book's concerned, we'll look out for that one as well. And afterwards, I'll get the link from you or some details, and we can share that around as well.
That'd be amazing.
As we will
Thank
with Howard's books as well, I'm sure, and Scott's YouTube channel, of course. But no, some really interesting points there about because it's easy, I think, to think about the arts as just the drawing, the art, being an artist, but there's actually loads of different forms of it. And I think really like that point about that being on stage, because actually probably every time that we stand in front of a group of stakeholders and we present our findings, we are similar, we're performing, as it were. And as you said, being able to react to their questions is always positive. I'm sure it's never as daunting with a BA audience and answering their questions than it might be in an improv show where you've got things being fired at you from left field.
I don't know, you'd be surprised.
Perhaps after this, we'll maybe we can talk about how we can all become improv artists. But
absolutely,
we'll see. Thank you very much. Great start for the session. Scott, over to you.
Well, my experience is a little bit different than Rachel's. So as a woodworker and bringing that skill set, I've been running a part-time woodworking business since 1999. So I've been doing it a long time, building my skills. But these type of skills don't really translate to business analysis. What I find is actually the opposite. So I'm a trained public speaker. I went through Toastmasters. I'm a CBAP certified. I'm CBDA certified. So I know data analytics. Well, data analytics is actually part of the formula you need to understand YouTube and how to be successful in that space. So I've been able to take what I've done professionally and extend those skills to help me run my business and become someone who's comfortable on camera. So for example, in IIBA, when I worked there, Susan and I were doing business analysis live. So live streaming, very different skill set, but certainly because of the experience in YouTube, was able to bring that to the audience and help. So there hasn't been much from the woodworking space that contributes to the business analysis space, but I found the opposite is true. Understanding how to run a business, understanding processes and efficiency, and being able to act professionally, being able to look at something and understand all the components of the pieces. Process design is not unique to the business space. It's actually very important in a workshop, making sure you're running consistently, efficiently, safely. So what I've found is a lot of the things I've learned over 29 years of being in the IT industry and working on business analysis and talking with business people has translated very well to teach me how to be a successful entrepreneur.
Brilliant, Scott. And I mean, it immediately makes me think, I see a lot of people in business analysis try and use different tools to help them, whether it's requirements tools, etc. I'm not so sure it would work if you can use multiple tools for the same job. But yes, I leave you to be the judge of that. But maybe it's an interesting parallel between the two anyway.
Yeah.
Howard, what would be your perspective on that same question?
Yeah, it's a little bit more obscure in terms of a connection than it would be, let's say, particularly in Rachel's case, because I'm actually quite jealous you have that theater arts background. I think that's probably one of the best backgrounds for art. And in fact, I used to have it I had an interest in theater arts back in high school, and just a little bit that I used to do back then has actually helped me a lot in terms of public speaking and being in front of a group of people. There's no question about it. In terms of why it's different in terms of what I do, which is visual art, is that most of my work is actually spent alone in a studio, not working with people, which is the essence of work with BA. So one of the things I actually find is that they balance each other off. All of this sort of private work that I do, it's really good for me, even just spiritually, emotionally, or whatever, to also have this other time where I'm connecting. But there are many ways, though, in which it has, particularly for me in my own career, there have been really interesting crossovers. Like in art today is very much a postmodern sort of effort. Um, and a big part of that means sort of thinking about thinking or being aware of where you are in the process while you're going through something. So, I mean, there's been direct applications of that. Um, for example, when I worked on my UML book, my first book, there it is there, UML for the IT Business Analyst. A lot of the work that I do in object orientation is about structuring knowledge. What do you know about things? And in order to do that, I find there's a really, really strong connection between um, object-oriented concepts such as classes and attributes, and that when we think about objects, we organize them into categories called classes, and how we structure all of that thought and what it means when we say something thing A is sort of like thing B. How is all of that thought structured? Um, this way of just thinking about thinking is something that I do all the time, when I'm painting. And I think it really sort of primed me for doing that. Uh, I also find that thinking about thinking affected my work even as a developer. So this is a little bit beyond even BA. So, for example, one of my earliest art projects was to sort of track my own eye as I was looking out over a landscape or over a cityscape, and then paint the way that I was seeing. So if I focused in on a specific area, I would paint that really heavily in great detail. If my eyes skipped over areas, I would allow that to happen as well in the painting. Ended up with very bizarre paintings, but it was really just following the way that my eye was going. This really had a huge application for me. And one of my first IT projects was to help develop a system that would examine a sample um, of a bacterial. It was a bacterial test. So these would be lab tests done on food products to work out the bacterial counts of various types of bacteria. And rather than having a human being go along a Petri dish and count the number of green dots and red dots and orange dots, which each, was identifying a different type of bacteria, this project was to have the computer do it. So to feed this image in and have the computer work out the counts. And it was very, very early days before there was almost any image recognition going on at all. So very, very low level code. And in order to figure this out, I actually did have to think about, well, how does my eye move across this sheet of paper? How does it know that this dot is not combined with this dot? These two, things are these two colors are actually part of the same dot, or are they part of a separate dot? All these kind of questions I just had to ask myself and just think about and just follow my own pathway. And by doing that, I was actually able to develop a really good, chunk of software, way before its time. So I think in terms of thinking about object orientation, in terms of specific projects like that, it's been very, very useful, this whole idea of just thinking about thinking. And I think just overall, too, a big interest in me in art and my fascination with painting is that I can start off with just basically 3 or 4 colors. Right? You got red, yellow, the primaries, right? Blue. We often like to have some white in there too. Black can be mixed. And with just that, I can do paintings that would satisfy my curiosity for an entire lifetime and have satisfied people's curiosity for decades, or I should say centuries, and examine almost any topic on earth that I want to examine with that. And I find that a very common aspect of what I love about business analysis as well. And it's something that I like to really zero in on. The fact that there are specific tools like decision table analysis or root cause analysis or, object orientation, and that you can take these tools and I can walk in with this set of tools, just like my red, yellow, and and blue, and I can walk into almost any situation in any business. And my own career has taken me through, whether it's healthcare, whether it's banking, whether it's insurance. I mean, it's just taken me through, yeah, military, and the same techniques actually can get me there. Something that I find very, very fascinating in art that applies also to BA. But also, like Scott, the reverses also happen. So a lot of my interest in business analysis, for example, I worked on have bled over into art. So my interest in object orientation and in the UML diagrams that has actually bled directly into my art, and I've actually created diagrams like that, but made them paintings, done them as paintings. So the cover of this book is actually that. All of these pictures are actually examples of what I'm talking about right now. So, I did work on communication systems, and the way that visual and textual information is divided up into packets and then reassembled at the other end. And this whole concept was really fascinating to me. And I also developed paintings that did exactly the same thing, that broke down the visual field into packets of visual information and then created paintings out of them. So it's been a two-way street, and, a very fruitful one for me.
It certainly demonstrates, as the Rachel and Scott's answer there, Howard, that there's a lot of cross pollination. Like, it could be
Yes.
both ways, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think art in business analysis is one of those, that connection. I think that is not always appreciated sometimes. I mean, I do speak to a lot of people who are BAs, and they tell me they're frustrated artists as well. Even on this very session, I've had a few. I think that's where this idea probably came from, I think. But I even recall way before I was a BA, my original plan in life was to maybe be a designer of some sort, and that didn't quite work out. But actually, from being a BA, I found that I get plenty of opportunity to design processes, to design systems, to model. And it's really, it really is a huge outlet for that creative side.
Modeling is such a great example, because this recognition of the power of visualizations, that to visually model something allows somebody to see everything at a glance and to see all the relationships between things at a glance in a way that you don't get with text, because it's a very sequential way of form of communication. That's something that I learned through art, and that I apply a lot. And I guess it's probably not coincidence that, I do have a great preference for visual tools as a business analyst.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, probably is a coincidence for most of us, I think. I wonder, perhaps, Scott, I'll ask you a question there in terms of, whether you can provide any examples or an example of where you might have applied an artistic technique or an artistic perspective, perhaps, to your work in BA. And it doesn't necessarily be your woodworking prowess, but art in general, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's expressed more in creativity. And I'll give you an example of using analogies. So I was working on a project where we had to make our English product bilingual, meaning it's in French. In Canada, we're a bilingual country. And I was pitching this to an American audience, an internal organization. I was working at Capital One, and trying to express to them how we were trying to get things to be bilingual. And it was for some of those people, it was a very foreign concept. So I used some creativity and figured out, if we look at our cereal box, we've got English on one side, French on the other. So I found a box of Cheerios in Canada, packed it in my suitcase, went down to the US, bought a box of Cheerios before I had this presentation to a large audience. And I showed that to them. I said, here's the Cheerio box from the US. Here's the Cheerio box from Canada. The product inside is likely made in the exact same factory. The difference here is, in Canada, we've got English on one side, French on the other. All we're talking about in this project is communicating differently. The product is exactly the same. So it was being able to take a creative way to express something. It was visual, it was something people could relate to. A little bit what Rachel said, it's storytelling. It sort of allowed people to understand, here's something we're trying to accomplish in a world where it was a very foreign concept.
Excellent example there, Scott. Thank you very much. Howard, your view.
Yeah, sure. In terms of, well, a very, very specific example is that in my last book, I actually included paintings in order to illustrate ideas of business analysis. So one of the big things that I did in this book was I was sort of making a comparison between two different ways of creation, two different approaches to creation, of creating a product. These over here represent one aspect, and then this one over here represents another. So I don't know if you can see it here, but this is actually a painting by my father. This is a painting by me of a clementine. It's a very precise, very highly planned painting, and I sort of spoke about that as an analogy for the waterfall approach, where it takes a lot of very precise planning, really doing every step properly before the next step occurs, to be able to do something like that. At the same time, and I talked about this in terms of I find a connection between that and the process that we use as a business analyst. When we are working on a product that is similar to something that we've done before, where we've got a repeatable process that is pretty guaranteed to work over and over again, it is the best way. Even though I'm a big pusher of agile, I don't think it's the best approach for every situation. And similarly for painting in art, a very well-planned approach is something, is the type of thing you need for certain types of projects. But then I spoke also about other projects where, like in the case over here, this is I don't know how well you can see it, but these are two large paintings, 15 feet by 9 feet, that were done in an art installation at an art exhibition that I had. And I had very little idea of what those paintings were going to look like before they began. I had a vision and I had constraints, right? My vision was they were going to express heaven and hell somehow. They were going to merge what I feel about history, about physics, deep physics, and about perception, how we perceive things. And somehow they would do this in these really large paintings that would envelop the viewer in an environment. That's why they had to be so big. And I knew my constraints, that the elevator getting out of my my studio building is only so big. So I had to, it wasn't 15 feet, but I was able to fold these, but I had to actually work it out according to the constraints. What are the constraints of the exhibition? And then everything else was really up to me, to whatever the process would uncover. And I found that very, very similar to my approach as an agile business analyst. Nothing works without a vision. So yes, there has to be a vision there. You have to have an idea of what the outcome that you want is. In the case of my art, I wanted to have a certain experience for the user to have when they walked into that room. As a BA, I'm looking for certain user experiences as well. But as to the detail, that happens through a process of experimentation, which means you try something out, you put it in front of the user to get a reaction, and then you make an adjustment. And that process is exactly the same for me for our projects of this type and for innovative BA projects. The only difference being that the stakeholder that needs to be satisfied in business analysis is a person who is not yourself, right?
Yeah.
It is the actual customer. Whereas I think the ultimate person I'm trying to satisfy in art is only myself. It's one of the things I love about doing it. I don't have to worry about those other stakeholders too much, but I am a very difficult stakeholder. So satisfying myself is actually not an easy thing. So I still find it's still the same process of hypothesize what you think might be a good idea, create a small version of it or a cheap version of it, and then test it out and then adjust.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And certainly, it's resonating with me, Howard, because quite often,
Mm-hmm.
when we think about solutions that we're building, whether it's technology or otherwise,
Mm.
trying to start with that big map of what it could look like is quite a difficult one. So at least thinking incrementally, let me focus first on one small part of
Yeah.
it and try and
It's
let
not
that.
just the difficulty, and it's not just that you could make a mistake. It's that you lose the opportunity for learning along the way. Because
Yeah,
along the way, you may find out, you may come across solutions that are much better than what you were thinking of when you started off with.
that's
And
right.
that's very much true when you're developing a novel product as well.
Yeah, I like that, and especially that concept, that open-mindedness as well that comes with
Mhm,
it.
mhm.
Rachel, I'd like to ask you that same question about how you brought artistry into your role, or vice versa.
Absolutely. And so I've mentioned earlier sort of some of the more specific techniques that I've sort of brought into my practice. So the emo quads exercise, some of the improv games, I'm still working on ways that they can be brought into the business world. And certainly, you know, the stuff around the public speaking that I was talking about. So helping others who maybe are not quite so confident on stage, get over the stage jitters and employ some of those techniques that we use in the theatre, in the business sense. So being able to come in, do a presentation at quite late notice as well, and how to sort of, you know, bring in that improv confidence as well, and how to deal with those sort of situations. But I think sort of speaking to something that Howard mentioned, something about space. So if I'm running a workshop, certainly the big stakeholder workshops, those visioning ones, those ideation sessions, I sort of treat each one like a little performance. So what's the staging of this performance? What does the room need to look like? How can I bring in creative exercises that will engage people from the moment they walk in? They've got to be engaged. They've got to look around and go, "Oh, this is intriguing. There's something really interesting going on here." So creating little like artistry stations, so pulling in a little bit of craft so people can just work on things in little stations, encouraging a lot of movement around the space, thinking about things such as lighting and sort of the seating arrangements and things like that. How can we best use that space to stage this performance that is the workshop? So yeah, I think I do actually use a lot of theatre techniques a lot of the time, in the business space.
Interesting when I hear you talk about that, Rachel. I mean, you know, it definitely you think, oh yeah, you know, there's so many like correlations where you could use that you know theatre experience and apply it in the BA world, and it makes me think as well. Some time back, I attended the Royal Academy of Drama and Arts. They were, or rather, they were hosting some sessions on public speaking. You know, and how you can improve your stage presence as well. And we had it from a BA and consulting perspective. But it was really interesting then if I think back of the correlations between what we were doing, i.e. stand up in front of stakeholders and presenting to them, and what somebody who's on stage needs to do, you know, and it's, you know, I think I was probably guilty of it at the time of being quite monotone when I try and, you know, talk to stakeholders or not particularly emphasising particular points with my voice. And I'm sure that was okay for 10 minutes, maybe, but certainly an hour of me speaking in a very flat voice, as one example, is probably not particularly interesting for anybody. So just that alone is a good example for me of how we can bring a little bit of artistry and apply it to our BA role or
Absolutely.
our wider role. You know.
Yeah, and there's so much, a lot of body language. Not only helps you to be sort of more authoritative on stage and to gain more confidence, but if you have strong body language, you're projecting better, you're managing the stage, the space better. So there's loads of practice around that. Yeah, you see an actor on stage or you see a professional speaker, you know, so you get that sort of TED talk sort of image in your head. It's a lot of that is about body language, charisma, the tone of voice, again, that storytelling, so that narrative that draws the audience in and gets them invested in what you're talking about. So absolutely, so many applications of that in business. And I think you sort of say public speaking to a lot of people and they're like, "Ooh, no, I don't do public speaking," but we all do every single day. Every time you stand up in front of your team, you have a conversation with a colleague, you log onto a Teams call, give an update, whatever you're doing, you're public speaking. It might not be on a stage in front of hundreds of people, but you're doing it. And I think people don't realize that they're more practiced at it and generally better at it than they think they are.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, and it probably extends from, you know, obviously we're talking there about being on stage. I know there's when we're talking about Howard about that you know more visual art, as it were. I'm not sure if there is a category for it, but both of them are equally important. And you know, when I think about some of the ways that I try and bring a bit of an artistic slant, I guess, on BA. Is trying to recognise that sometimes I might use a model ordinarily with maybe other BAs to share with them some information I have, but not all stakeholders are familiar with or going to resonate with a sequence diagram as an example. So can we liven it up a bit? Can we make it a bit more visually appealing? can, like Howard's pitches, can we encourage the audience to want to come and have a look at what we're producing? Because if they're coming to it to have a look, then maybe actually they'll take a little bit more time to understand it rather than having that reluctance from the start because, well, it looks fairly boring or technical drawing. I don't think I want to look at that. Or as something interesting, like Howard's two pictures as an example, will I'm sure draw people to it rather than scare them away.
Absolutely.
I wonder then, on a similar note, we've obviously talked about, how you've applied some examples. I wonder, perhaps Howard, are there any skills particularly that maybe you haven't mentioned from your artistic pursuits that you think are very easy for, whether it's for you or for generally for BAs to transfer to their BA life?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a skill, but it's something that has to be developed, I think, over time, which is a tolerance for uncertainty and a belief in your vision, even though all the evidence is pointing to the contrary. So I think when I start off an art project, I think first of all, I think maybe I turn this around a little bit. The biggest reward you get in the art world is for innovation, not technical skill. That doesn't mean you don't have to have the technical skill, but there's a gazillion people out there who have amazing technical skill, and you just have to look on Instagram today, and I just can't believe the kind of paintings that I'm seeing there, for example. But what makes somebody really rise to the top is they've done something innovative, something that nobody has actually really tried before, and that you look and you go, oh, wow, that's really something. And that is where the big payoff comes in art. That's where your reputation is made. And so you develop a great, great tolerance for risk, and you almost seek out innovative projects. And I don't know if this is, because maybe that's something in me and that leads me both to art and to BA, or because I do this in art, I do it in the IT world. But I've always sought out areas that people have not got into yet, where there's going to be innovation there, and I just really gets my juices going. And it goes all the way back to I did one of I mentioned that image recognition project. There was nothing like that I knew of that anybody else was doing at that time, and I thought, okay, well, I have to get into this one. Like I just made sure I was going to do that project. Um, I had another project. It was the first time that the Kix operating system was being combined with with a mainframe COBOL application. So Kix was CICS was one of the first interactive operating systems for mainframes. A really big deal back when it happened. We used this sort of weird thing called pseudo conversational mode, and it was very difficult to figure out, how to make this all work. And I actually had to work out the architecture for a very large company, and it was one of the first companies that was trying to do this. We had to work very closely with IBM to do it, but I was excited about it because nobody at the company and hardly anybody in the world was doing it at the time. I want to get in there, right? Same thing happened with object orientation. The combination of business analysis and the object-oriented approach to analysis and design was that particular intersection was not well understood by any of the clients that I was working with, and so I decided that's where I'm going to really zero in. And so I think that that's probably the biggest thing is it's not just tolerance for it, but actually seeking out areas where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of innovation, and just getting really, really excited about that. And I'd say the sort of along that as well, and it's again not specific to art, but if you are going to be an artist, you have to have a lot of self-motivation. You just have to. No one is pushing you to do what you want to do. Nobody is running, to go and see art shows. Usually, you have to it really has to be something where you're pulling people. And it's that kind of, I don't know, crazy overconfidence, that, has got me to not only take on the kind of jobs I talked about, but also just to decide that I'm going to write a book, and then I'm going to write another book and another book. And each one of these was a very, very scary thing to get involved in. I'd say most of the times that people write books, they don't go anywhere. And I know that personally from a lot of friends of mine who are authors. So, it's a very risky thing to take on. And yet I did it because I think I just had that predisposition towards doing it, or just used to doing it and taking on those challenges from art.
That's good. Yeah. No, excellent start. Thank you, Howard. Rachel.
Yeah, so thinking about how people can bring artistic practice into business analysis practice. I think it sort of leans on something that Howard touched on there, which is not fearing the uncertainty. So in workshops, especially, or when dealing with stakeholders, we can have a very clear idea of how we're going to proceed, what we're trying to get out of a session, what sort of information we're going to capture, the structure of the session, the agenda. And so often, halfway through, it becomes apparent that that approach just isn't going to work. It's not going to work with this group of stakeholders. It's the wrong time to start looking at the level of detail. We need to take a step back and look at higher detail, higher level information. So many things can disrupt your brilliantly made plans around workshops. So pulling in sort of that improvisation, that sort of ability to flex and to deal with whatever's thrown at you. There's a concept in improv, which is yes and. So if somebody else says something, that's the truth. That's the world they've built. And if they say yes, if they say something, you yes, you and then you build on that world that they've created. You never throw it out the window. You never deny that reality that they've created. And I think there's something similar to that in workshops, which is your stakeholders are telling you that this isn't working. Your stakeholders are giving you clues. They're giving you tells. They're not. They may just outright tell you this is not working for us, but quite often you sort of just realize there's not the engagement you would hope for, and that's when you have to yes and say, okay, that's the reality, and let's go and try a different approach. So it's being able to flex, it's being able to be creative on the spot, innovate, as Howard was saying, and come up with a new approach that gets you to a different goal, and not be too wedded to that original vision, not be too wedded to that script.
Absolutely. Scott?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different things here. I'm hearing a bit of a theme. I think one thing that the three of us are bringing is conceptualization. So Howard uses 3 paint colors to achieve his outcome. I'm using a pile of wood and being able to conceptualize what I can do with that wood and build a beautiful piece of furniture. So
and also
I
a
think
preset group of tools, that you have, Scott.
Yeah,
like you're
and I
using the
think
same tools
that
over and
idea,
over.
and you mentioned it, Howard, about having a vision.
So
So it's that ability to conceptualize, hey, here's an idea. I want to do something with that. How do I go about doing it? Translates right into the business analysis career, right? If I'm a lead BA and I'm working on a project, I've got 5 other BAs, I have to relate to them. What is it we're trying to do? How are we going to accomplish it? This is the vision. This is how we're going to structure things. So that ability that I can flex more in my woodworking space than I can in the professional space gives me some confidence and gives me some experience to be able to lead a team, or lead a group, or lead an idea or an exploration. I think the other part of it too is what I've learned in a workshop environment, whether you're working in woodworking or you're working on a car, using the right tool for the job. If you use the wrong tool for something, you're not going to be as successful at it. You might ruin something. It's the exact same thing with business analysis. There are 40 to 50 different tools that we can use in the profession, and it's choosing the right tool for the job. So the more tools that you have in your toolbox as a BA, the more successful that you're going to be. And as Rachel mentioned, the better you're going to be able to pivot, because you can put this tool down and pick this up. I'll use an example. SWOT analysis. I think it's far overused. People just, they learn it in business school. It's used a lot. But there's something called, there's a roadmap. It's business mapping, capability mapping. That tool in itself can give you different results. So rather than going for a SWOT analysis, you're leading a team through looking at capability mappings. Again, just a different tool, but depending on how your audience is reacting and how experienced your audience is, then you can change that. A business model canvas is yet another example. Not many people have heard of that, but if you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's a really good tool. So use the right tool for the job. The third thing I want to mention, and it has been very important for me throughout my career, my creative outlet is part of my mental health. So if I'm working a 50, 60, 70-hour week, I can continue to do that. But if I do that year over year, that will lead to burnout. And I'm not using burnout loosely. I've clinically been diagnosed with burnout and have had to recover from that. What helps me is being creative. I'm using a different part of my brain, and it's staying active, and it's helping me be a healthy person that I can continue to do my job very, very well. When you get into burnout, it's very difficult to go through and, first of all, understand it, but then seek the help to recover from that. So a couple lessons learned over a 29-year career. The creative aspect of all the stuff that we're doing here is a really important balance in mental health.
I really like that perspective, Scott, because it shows as well that we can take the artistic side, we can take into our role, and we can get all the benefits that we've heard of from the three of you so far. But also, it's got benefits actually indirectly, of actually allowing us to take ourselves away from our day job, or to just think about something different, or to maybe be selfish a little bit, and go and take ourselves away, look after what we want to do, rather than look after something that 20 stakeholders have to have an opinion on, as it were. So yeah, I really like that perspective. What's actually come across a lot actually in your answers, and actually what you've previously said, is that that artistic side doesn't have to be constrained to sort of like the visual form or to how you might present on stage. And it's as much about your mindset, I think, as much as it is the physical outside. So I really like the way that the three of you have articulated different perspectives on the topic. And I think I'm not sure I can do much more justice in terms of adding more to it. I would say, I mean, certainly I look for any opportunity I can to draw a picture with my stakeholders, rather than to resort to just putting tons and tons of words on a page. I always try and put myself in the perspective of the stakeholder and say, well, actually, how would they consume my analysis? How can I make it easy for them? How can I make it interesting? How can I make them want to look at it so that they can tell me if it's wrong, or tell me how to correct it, or how to add to it as well? But the three of you have done such a good job on that question. There's really not much more for me to add, so I won't kill it. I think as well, I think it'd be quite good to talk about advice that you would give to other business analysts who've got an interest or an artistic side, how they can leverage that artistic side in their role. So by all means, answer the question how you wish. It can be practically, or it can be a little bit off the wall, but entirely up to you. But perhaps let's pose that question to Rachel, if I could, to start with.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because there's something we've alluded to throughout the conversation. Is I think traditionally, historically, there's been a sense.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure.
There we go. So I'll stop the recording then. Sorry, but yeah, thank you. Really, really good session. Really interesting. Yeah, I feel like I might introduce about another 10 sessions like this on this topic. It's such a big run, really.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? I might reach out to you and have a chat with you more specifically about some of these things that we've talked about today. As an example, it's a little bit easier for me to bump into Rachel conference or a forum than it perhaps is yourself, Howard and Scott. But doesn't mean you can avoid me. But yeah, when I see you next time.
Question for you, John. Have you done any content atomization yet? So, for example, taking this 1 hour recording, you can take 30, 60 seconds and actually make it a small video to post on LinkedIn
Yeah, I've been doing a few shorts. So they go on YouTube shorts, actually. So I've been doing some of that. So typically there's at least one YouTube short that comes out for every session, really.
Good.
Yeah, so I found that a nice way to just get people to go, maybe I'm not picking this topic, but if there was a topic out there, BA related, someone go, that feels a bit dry. But if they can hear a minute or so extract and realise that, like this conversation, there's loads of interesting stuff you can talk about, then it might encourage them to listen to the video.
And if I can throw in a little plug at the end, that on my favorite visual modeling tool today is story mapping. I think it's the most incredible and simple to learn, extremely powerful technique. And I'll be doing a talk on that in January. So if you follow my LinkedIn, you'll find out exactly when it'll be, but it'll be sometime in the beginning of January.
That, Howard, has just reminded me, actually, if the three of you, if I could ask a favour of all three of you, if there is anything you want me to plug as well. So, like, for example, I had Helen on here a few months ago. She was writing a book at the time, wanted to present it. So I was able to get an image off Amazon, put an image of it, put it on screen at the end. So, if there's something that it'd be helpful for me to plug on your behalf, just send me the link. If there's a link to a visual, or just send me a visual, whatever it might be. and I shall do it.
Brilliant. Thank
Yeah,
you.
even if you don't
Okay.
have it now, I mean, if you just think you will do it, just let me
Yeah.
know perhaps in the next 24 hours that you intend to share something.
Yeah,
And then
and Rachel, if
I'll-
you're doing any sessions on public speaking, that'd be really interesting to let people know about. I'm sure the people
Yeah,
that I would like to do it. I
I'd
actually have
love.
a friend who is an actor, and he's actually stopped acting, and this is what he does. He
Oh,
basically goes
wow.
around helping people in business, do public speaking, and he goes all over the world doing it.
Amazing.
There is
Oh,
a really, really big need for that.
yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly crossed my mind as a future career path, sort of,
Um,
yeah, exec coaching, public speaking, and
yeah,
things like that
yeah,
would be really, really good. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind making an introduction to your friend, if he's
yeah,
interested in
sure,
connecting, that'd be really good.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if either of you are interested in an alternate source of revenue, what I've
Hmm.
discovered is there's a way to teach classes. So you've seen
Hmm.
people do LinkedIn Learning.
Hmm.
Hmm.
You're actually
Yeah.
making LinkedIn rich.
Uh-huh.
You get paid very little, but there are a few of us now that have courses that are
Uh-huh.
hosted through a system called Kajabi. And so you can charge, $500, $800 a course, and you're getting 98% of that revenue.
What's it
So
called?
Wow.
Kajabi?
if you've ever thought about doing something like that,
Hmm.
reach out to me and let me know, because I can walk you
Oh, yeah.
through how I've developed my site, developed my courses, that type of thing.
Amazing.
Very
Thank
interested,
you.
Scott. Be in
Yeah,
touch.
very
Yeah.
Definitely.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
There we go. Feel like you might have inadvertently organised a session for yourself, Scott, as through us.
Yeah, that actually would be a good session.
Exactly. Yeah. No, definitely.
How to
I'll
do that. Yeah.
reach out
Yeah.
to you on that because that's of interest. All right. I'm sorry to take more time than we planned, but
No,
not
don't
only
worry.
is the topic interesting, but you're interesting
Hmm.
to speak to as well. But I'll leave it there. Thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you soon. All right. But anything I can do for you, you reach out. You know where I am, and I'll be happy to
Yeah.
return.
Thanks a lot for arranging that,
Magic.
John. And nice to meet you, Rachel. And nice to see you again, Scott.
Yeah, lovely
Yes, you
to meet
too.
you all. Thanks, John. I will send over some links and to things that are coming up for me if
Mm.
that's cool.
That's
Thank you.
perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to
Okay.
seeing you
Thanks.
again soon. All right. Have a
Take
good night.
care, everyone.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.